Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, the Finance Committee is considering something we call in the Senate tax extenders. And one of those is the wind production tax credit. And for the next 10 minutes or so, I'd like to address that law, which has been on the books for 20 years, expired in December, and in my view, needs to stay expired. One of the things we remember most about the late President Reagan is his saying that the closest you'll come to eternal life on this earth is a government program. Well, my nomination for the most glaring example of a government program that seems to have eternal life is the wind production tax credit, the federal taxpayer subsidy for what I would call big wind. Here's what the wind production tax credit does. Let's say you build one of these 20-story turbines, and you begin, the windmills, the turbines begin to go around, and as they will about a third of the time to produce electricity. And so every hour of electricity that you produce, we measure that by kilowatt hours, the taxpayers will pay you 2.3 cents. Now, Mr. President, that's a pretty good deal because the wholesale price of wind, depending on the section of the country, might range from about 3 cents per hour to 7 cents an hour. So let's say you're in Oregon or a part of the country where they have pretty cheap electricity, and you sell wind for 3 cents an hour. You'll pay 1 cent of the money you get in federal corporate tax. That leaves you with 2 cents. But then the taxpayer is going to come in and pay you 2.3 cents on top of that. And because it's a tax credit, it's worth even more. Now, Mr. President, it's even better than that. That's not just for 1 year, that's for 10 years. So every time we have a 1-year extension of the wind production tax credit, we tell the owner of the wind turbine, and usually they take these ownerships and they put them in portfolios and they split them up and sell them to rich people around the country and around the world who can use the tax credits. It's for 10 years. So the wind production tax credit is 2.3 cents per kilowatt hour of taxpayer money every year for 10 years if you're producing electricity. Now, this provision of the tax code was enacted in 1992. Its sponsors said it was to be, in their words, temporary. It was to do what we have several times done in our country, which is to jumpstart a new energy technology. Well, as President Reagan observed, eternal life for a government program sinks in pretty quickly. This temporary tax code, enacted in 1992, more than 20 years ago, has had 8 extensions since its enactment. And the wind industry has become a very well-developed industry. I asked President Obama's Nobel Prize-winning energy secretary, Secretary Chu, in the first term of President Obama's administration, how he would describe wind power. And he said it was a mature technology. Mr. President, the number one problem with the wind development tax credit, wind production tax credit, is its cost. Congress enacted a 1-year extension for 2013. That was a cost of $12 billion to the taxpayers. Remember, not all in 2013, that's just the first year. Then every year after that, for 9 more years, you get the subsidy. For 2014, another 1-year extension, which is being considered by the Finance Committee, that's another $6 billion. This is real money. I mean, just look at the amount of money we spend on government-wide energy research in multiple agencies. The number is about $10 billion. So let's say we, through our research, developed a way to capture carbon from coal plants and recycle that carbon and turn it into something commercially feasible and sell it. Then suddenly, all these coal plants, which people worry about because they produce carbon, would be as clean as nuclear power or as clean as wind power, and we'd be building coal plants everywhere in America. And we'd have cheap energy as a result of that, even cheaper energy for a longer period of time. We spend $10 billion on energy research in a year. The cost of the last wind production tax credit extension was $12 billion. Or, by comparison, take tax breaks for big oil. One of the last times President Obama wanted to stop the tax breaks for what he called big oil, he identified $4 billion worth of tax breaks. Well, most of those tax breaks for big oil are tax breaks that many manufacturing companies have. But the point I'm trying to make is that we're talking about lots of money. Now, the supporters of this tax credit will say, let's phase it out. Or I would like to get rid of it. In fact, it is phased out. If Congress didn't act, it's all of those people who currently today have their wind turbines would continue to get their subsidies for up to 10 more years. So that phases it out. It's already phased out. But let's say we phase it out according to a proposal that was made last year by the wind industry. Well, the American Wind Energy Alliance said that might cost as much as $50 billion over 10 years, a huge amount of money. Now, there could be some other form of phase out, and I'd welcome the opportunity to see it, that wouldn't cost so much, and maybe that would make sense, but beware the phase out. Now, Mr. President, the United States uses 20 to 25% of all the electricity in the world. It's important to us. We use it for our computers, we use it for our businesses, we use it for our military, we use it for our lights. If the lights go out in America, America stops. That's how important electricity is to us. Where does that electricity come from? 4% of it comes from wind power. And of course, that's only available when the wind blows, usually at night, usually when we need it least. 4% of it, after 20 years of billions of dollars. The rest of it comes 7% from hydroelectric power, 19% from nuclear power, which is about 60% of all of our clean energy, nearly 40% from coal, 27% from natural gas, so 4% from wind. Now, it is true, as wind power advocates say, that in the past Congress has approved other jump starts for energy technology. But the difference is we put a cap on it. We're very happy about all the unconventional gas we have in this country today. Suddenly we have an enormous amount of natural gas, and the research for that partially came from Sandia Laboratory, from Department of Energy demonstration grants, and there was a tax credit for fracking. But it expired in 1992, and the demonstration grants are over, and this technology is out into the marketplace and making lives better all across the country. Or take plug-in electric cars. I supported that. But there was a cap on the number of credits we had for plug-in electric cars, 200,000 per manufacturer. Or the nuclear production tax credit. Just like the wind production tax credit. Sell an hour of electricity from a nuclear power plant will give you a taxpayer credit. But that's capped at 6,000 megawatts. So there's a limit to it. There's no cap on the amount of electricity produced by wind. I don't know the exact number, but it's probably in the 50 or 60 or 70,000 range. Problem number one was cost. Problem number two is reliability risk. The problem here is that Congress is picking winners and losers when it gives wind power such a big subsidy that sometimes the subsidy is more than the cost of the electricity. What this does is undercut our coal and nuclear plants. And what that does is put us at risk as a country. Any country that uses that much electricity needs these big plants that operate almost all the time, coal and nuclear, to keep the lights on, to have the jobs running, to have the cars running, to make America run. We can't run on windmills when the wind blows. We can't run only on solar power when the sun shines. We have to have the base load power. And because of the wind subsidy, picking and choosing winners and losers, it undercuts the baseload power and is called the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a very respected organization, to say that the combination of the federal subsidy for wind power and low gas prices could cause 25% of our nuclear plants in America to close in the next 10 years. That would be a terrible blow to our country's economy, to our effort to improve family incomes, to find jobs for middle-class Americans. How would that be? How does it do that? Well, let's take this example. Let's say you're in Chicago, and it's the middle of the night, 3 a.m., and the demand for electricity goes down as people go to sleep. Well, the supplier of electricity to your home or your business in Chicago is buying electricity into the market, from the market, at the lowest possible cost. Well, the demand goes down, the price goes down, and who's left out there selling electricity? It's the wind power people, because they can sell their product at less than they paid for it and still make a profit because of the subsidy. This negative pricing is what is undermining the baseload coal and nuclear. Mr. President, we're very proud of the fact that in our country we have, in effect, a domestic price for natural gas. It's very low, and chemical companies are moving back to America instead of leaving. Manufacturing plants are enjoying the lower cost. So are homeowners as they heat and cool their home. But we remember that natural gas prices can go up and they can go down. In 2005, they weren't $3 and $4 as they are today. They were $13. And in New England, even today, sometimes natural gas prices spike to $30 a unit. So it's important to have diversity, and it's important to have baseload power. Now, the third problem is that these large wind turbines destroy the environment in the name of saving the environment. Some people might like to look at them. I really don't. Particularly in my part of the country, the only place they work are along the foothills or along the tops of the most beautiful mountains in the eastern United States. So you'd string these 20-story structures with blinking lights that can be seen for 20 miles in the middle of the biggest view that you've got in the eastern United States. And they take up a lot of space, Mr. President. You could run these 20-story windmills from Georgia to Maine to produce electricity, scarring the entire eastern landscape, and you would produce the same amount of electricity that 8 nuclear power plants would produce, and you'd still need the nuclear power plants to produce electricity when the wind wasn't blowing, which is most of the time. The final problem is energy security. I had a meeting with George Shultz, the former Secretary of State, the other day in San Francisco. He made an observation I hadn't heard him make before. George Shultz said we should pay a lot of attention to generating more energy where we use it because of national security risks, unquote. George Shultz is head of the MIT Energy Consortium, and he was observing that the supply of energy ought to be near the user of energy. That's especially true with military stations. It could be true with the rest of us in this age of terrorism. And that's another reason it makes less sense to subsidize these giant turbines, say in the Great Plains, and then someone has to pay for 700 miles of transmission lines through backyards and nature preserves to get to Memphis to bring that electricity to Tennessee and the Tennessee Valley. So, Mr. President, expecting the United States to operate on windmills is the energy equivalent of going to war in sailboats while nuclear power is available. It's even worse than that. It's the same as destroying our nuclear ships, our nuclear plants, in the same way, and replacing them with sailboats. The energy subsidy for wind turbines has served a purpose for the last 22 years. We've spent enough money on it. We've distorted the market as much as we can stand. Because of the cost and because we're undermining the base load power of coal and nuclear, which puts us at risk as a country that uses 20 to 25% of the electricity in the world, my hope would be that the Finance Committee would save some money and let the marketplace flourish and give us the opportunity to allow the wind production tax credit to stay right where it is. naturally expire, as it did at the end of last year, and let those persons who already have the benefit of the credit enjoy them for the rest of the period of time. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.